Oh, okay. I hope it hasn't just started. I've talked a lot. A real benefit that will make the new identity remarkable. So remarkable doesn't mean just, oh, that's nice. It means, oh, that's nice. Guys, come and have a look at this. Or sharing it online, where you go, oh, that's fantastic. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that amazing? Oh, that's so cool. Oh, that's wonderful. I want to be involved in that. I want to share that. I want to tell my friends about it. And that's the one thing that is, it's really important, this, you know, and again, if it's just the one thing that we want to communicate, what do you want to say? If I throw, it's often described this, and again, by the creative director, who was my mentor for many years. If I throw 10 balls at you, you're highly unlikely to catch any. If I throw you one ball, you've got a chance. The point is, if you want to communicate 10 messages, please try to communicate them in 10 separate executions, not just one. So if you're going to do one message per execution, that's great, because it gives people a chance to go, oh, I know what you're talking about. I speak quickly. I try to slow down. I try to speak clearly. I say a lot of things. There's no way that you're going to remember every single word that I said. If I only said one thing, then I'd come back to this. What is the one thing we want to communicate with the identity? Keep it one. No ands in there. Oops. Next one. So here, Soul Cycle. Well, actually, this is people on bikes, and actually people. It's not just cycling. It was how it made you feel. So it wasn't just about fitness. So these things, it's how your brain, the cycling fills your body and it gets your adrenaline going and makes your brain zoom around all over the place, and you get this amazing rush of colors and craziness. I presume that's what they wanted to say, because the logo is very simple. The actual design work is super complicated but super fun. Next one. Thought starters. Now, you too, as clients, you can have great ideas. It takes an agency without egos, or a creative director, or executive creative director, design director, or whatever they want to be called, with a lesser ego than some others, to accept ideas that the client has come up with, or ideas from anywhere. Everyone can have good ideas if the brief is clear and concise. So as you write this, because you're writing it, why not let your creative juices flow and write down some initial thinking? Scribble them if you like, because if they're designs, then just write something down. The caveat is it's not compulsory, really. I mean, if you get something and you feel it's cool, great, go for it. If not, it doesn't matter. Leave a space there. You're paying people to come up with ideas. You don't have to do it yourself. But if you write a brilliant brief, it will help enormously, not just for the people who are going to be working on it, but for yourself. You think, ooh, I thought of that. How about that? And it might be a bad idea, but it doesn't matter. They are thought starters, because even a bad idea can turn into a gem, sometimes an award winner, just from an initial scribble. Here, I don't know who thought of this. I mean, this is new packaging design, but a new identity design, Fuller, and you've got the F and the R there, and they're two hands grabbing burgers, dirty, filthy burgers, fabulous. Look at them, how mouth-watering, delicious does all that look? Sorry for the vegetarians in the room, but it's still pretty damn nice looking. The points that somebody made was, it's nice to see burger advertising that actually doesn't feature the burger, but it does in that shape, in the negative shape there. I've done work. I did a poster of a Coke before, which used the negative shape. It was using the Coke ribbon, which is like that nice little swash, and I put two bikinis either side, so it looked like two women standing next to each other. But using negative spaces is often very nice, and leaves something for the viewer to work out. They go, oh, I see it now. What will make this loved by all and shareable? Because actually, we don't just do this for the sake of making things look pretty. Pretty is okay. Shared is better. as I mentioned before, if you tell your friends about it, then you're doing actually advertising for the brand. An unpaid advertising media force. Please write here what you think everyone will like and potentially how it could be shared. It could simply be that the product is genuinely brilliant in your opinion and people really will talk about it. Now you're in, I think, healthcare. So, I mean, there are some healthcare ads coming up and you'll see that actually they are phenomenal and they were shared by everyone. They're beautiful. After all, if customers go beyond just buying the product, but telling their friends about it, everybody wins. Okay, so completely different from healthcare advertisers. Garden soil, good for the plants and good for the earth. So it's actually recycled soil. But a striking logo, nice identity, very clean. You can see the website there. It's just very, very simple. I liked it. I literally saw this about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. I screen grab everything that I like. My phone has 62,000 pictures on it. Sorry, there's lots of pictures of my kids as well, but yeah, lots and lots of pictures of design because it's all very nice. And this is particularly pleasant. What goes around comes around. Lovely. But in terms of a brief for this, I'm pretty sure that it would have been, we want to be like this, we want to stand for this. And the company knows very, very well what its brand is. Budgets and timings, please, please, please put budgets on. I once begged, I used to have my own agency in the UK, and I begged a client when we did a pitch to them, could you let us know what the budget is, please? I said, no, you tell us, you tell us. Look, could you tell us an approximation of the budget because we just need to work to that? No, you tell us. Please, one last time, could you tell us what the budget is? No. Just let us know what you'll need to produce the work. We pitched. It went incredibly well. The client phoned me up and said, Chris, that was beautiful, amazing pitch. You absolutely blew all the other 3 agencies out of the water, but so did your costs. You're actually about 4 times over our budget. That's like, so you didn't have a budget? Yes. Okay, can you do it for that money? I said, no, we've already spent that on doing the work to date. I said, okay, can we buy the idea off you? Yes, you can. It'll be this much, but that's all we've got. Can we pay you this much? And it's like, no, because that's only for a day, and we spent 3 weeks on this. Right, we're not speaking to you again, and we'll never work with you again. It was horrendous. You just think we've gone from absolute heroes to absolute filth in a telephone call, where because you wouldn't share the budget with us. Please, you all know what kind of budget you have. So give them at least, say it's between $10,000 and $15,000, $50,000 and $100,000, $1 million and $2 million, whatever it is, give them, or at least give them a range, because there's no point in saying that we're going to do a shoot in the Bahamas if you've got $1,000. You can't do a shoot in the Bahamas now anyway, because you can't fly anywhere. But please, if possible, please let everyone know what your budget is. What do these figures include and exclude, and outline key timings for the project? Super helpful if possible for all of those. They really, really do help agencies a lot. This is what I was mentioning. You may well have seen this in supposedly healthcare category, not really. I mean, they are healthcare workers, but it's Dove, it's Campaign for Real Beauty. Now, that and its subsequent images, they're not pretty images, but they're beautiful in their own way, because you know what they are. And you know those are healthcare workers and what they're going through because of what we're all going through around the world. And when these things came, when these images came out, it was like, wow, good Lord. Yeah, it brings back, I mean, they were one of the first brands to really bring home truths, like people are suffering, not just the people with the virus, but the people who are dealing with the people with the virus. So very powerful posters. Mandatories. Well, this is the last one, by the way. So then I will shut up, and I was supposed to let you have some time for questions. So mandatories. Is there anything we must include? Does the company have existing corporate guidelines? If you do, please share. If there's anything like you have to use this logo, you have to use this typeface, please can you our tone of voice is like this. Just let us know. And it looks like a lot of information you have to fill in. But to be honest, I once there was an account director in an agency, it was a charity agency that I worked in London, in Shoreditch, in about 2010, I think. And she said to me, Chris, can we just get this brief out of the way? We've spent 45 minutes on it so far. It's just taking too long. And I said, do you know we're going to be working on this for the next 6 months? And 45 minutes now is not worth the time. If we get it wrong now, we're going to spend 6 months going around in circles. If we get it right now, we spend 50 minutes, or even if we spend 5 hours more on it, if we get it right, then we get a chance to do great work. The client will love it, it'll work extremely well for them, and they'll come back for more. So let's get it right now. These more healthcare stuff, and maybe you've seen these, be a hero, be boring. So I think this is kind of proactive work. This looks to me like the agency has gone, look, tell you what, guys, how do we do this? Because these are great fun. These superheroes, don't they look fantastic? But if an agency brings proactive work, the point of this is an agency brings proactive work to you, and you think, oh, that's really cool. Do it if you can. If you can find the budget, do it, or let them do it. It's not just for awards. It is not just for fame either. Before I joined DDB, I had my own agency called Rockstar. It's kind of still running now in the background, and I do small private projects. But Rockstar was not about me. It was about helping clients become rock stars in their company, sometimes in their network, sometimes worldwide. Because I'd realized that you do one great campaign, the client buys it, lets it go forwards, doesn't kill it, builds on it, and then it explodes in a good way, and they get huge recognition for it. And you know what? Those clients who do that, they're few and far between in Vietnam. I only really have about 1 or 2 I've ever worked with here. But the joy of working with these people is seeing their success. It's not about our success. It's not about us getting all this metal and gongs. It's watching the lady who was at Visa instantly, through 2 small campaigns I did for her, become the top 4 talents for Southeast Asia, and the top, sorry, for Asia Pacific, and in the top 2 talents for Southeast Asia, for Visa. Globally, this is, I mean, this is our region, but globally, because she did these 2 great campaigns. One of them was proactive. I did it off my own back. I said, how about we do this? Visa was already a client, so it wasn't scam, but you can get some great work out that makes your name. Now, I had one client say to me when I presented this concept to him in terms of, my aim as an agency, and our aim is to make you a rock star. I said, I don't want to be a rock star. I want my brand to do brilliantly, and I want the company share price to go up. I think, okay, you can, it's fantastic. And if you want to remain nameless and unknown for the rest of your career, that's absolutely fine too. I didn't say this. But if you have a chance to do something outstanding, why not go for it? I mean, unless, people get nervous and they think, let's water it down. By the time you finish watering it down, it's not worth doing. So these ones were cracking examples, I think. Again, they've won awards, but they're also quite beautiful. And that's.
Sorry to interrupt, Chris.
Yes,
you
it's
have
time to
about
finish,
2 minutes.
I know. I was watching. I've got the last little bit here. Hang on. So what I showed you just then was I find it very difficult to brief, and I always have, illustration. Illustration to me is very hard. I love illustration. It's beautiful what you get back, but I find it hard to brief. I don't have a brief for briefing illustrators. I wish I did. If any of you out there has got any ideas, great, because this stuff is gorgeous, but I wouldn't know how to brief it. I can brief ads, I can brief concepts, but I find it hard to brief, just let somebody go free, which these are fabulous. This is the last slide, I promise. And this shows you, even after all the years I've been doing this is only recently, about 3 months ago, I sent some quick first ideas to my client. I said, hi, Mark, any of these working for you? 3 or 4 would be my preference. I'm going to send you something my daughter did last night. His daughter's 11. Anyway, so it put me in my place. It doesn't matter how many awards you've won, how experienced, knowledgeable you are, how many great designs you've done, and these may or may not be great designs, but there's always someone who's got a daughter who can do something better. Anyway, I hope that makes you smile. It made me smile a lot. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, please fire away. But otherwise, you've got the whole deck here and you can go through that brief in detail whenever you like. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. We'll be taking a few questions if anybody has.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't think we've got time for questions, but it's very important that we do ask them if we have them. So can I ask if we can move on, but that if people have questions, if you could just put it in our chat and then we can get Chris to please answer them, and you know, you can basically have your questions answered in the chat, but we need to move along, please. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kim.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Our second speaker will be Qiniso Dladla from 2D Photography. Qiniso is a videographer from Durban, South Africa. He has collaborated with a diverse client base, such as the Cotton On Foundation, Hillcrest AIDS Center, and World Health Organization. Over to you, Qiniso.
How's it, everyone? It is a bit kind of a self-tutorial. I'm not seeing everyone's faces or maybe seeing pictures, not having much interaction, but I hope everyone can hear me. If I could have this one favor from everyone, could I ask you to turn your cameras on, if you don't mind? Those who do mind, it's okay, you can turn them off. To turn them on, I'd love to do an exercise, which is, I hope everyone's got a smartphone. I'm sure at this time everyone does have a smartphone. And I'd love you to take a video. This is what normally happens to me on the day-to-day, is I get a call from a client. Client says, Quinn, could you come over and take a nice video for my company or for my daughter or for my wedding? And normally that's just the brief. So I'd like you to have this experience that I generally have, and I'm sure you may be on the other end, often phoning a client, phoning a videographer or photographer, wanting to do some work. So can I ask you to take a video of whatever in front of you, but it must be nice. I want to like it. This is for Quinn. If you don't mind, just 2, 3, 5 minutes for you to take a video, a nice video showcasing where you are. And you can use it as a nice break, creative break, and walk around, enjoy yourselves. Nice. Can I get a thumbs up when everyone is done? Sweet. Thanks, Kyle. Awesome. So, if you guys don't mind also turning your microphones on, just for some feedback. How was that, getting that request? How did you feel about me just asking to do that? Apart from being so random on a Zoom meeting. Fire away,
a little bit unprepared, but I had the tool to create something. So
awesome.
I think it went according to the brief.
Awesome. Supergazi, something?
It felt normal to me because I'm usually taking pictures and videos, you know, in my everyday life. You know, I'd even snap my breakfast and put it as a WhatsApp story. So it felt normal. Yeah.
Cool.
So I'm very excited about it because at the moment I'm in Grotto Bay, which is on the west coast of South Africa, and it's a It's like a nature reserve, so it's really beautiful here. So I'm excited to share where I am with everyone. But I would be very worried if I was at home.
Awesome. So, and I don't know who else took videos, but if you guys don't mind, just sharing on the screen the video you did take. Just a little. Maybe we'll start with Kyle. Or the reflection, we reflecting on the screen.
Terry, I'm also in the bush, so I wish you guys could
yeah.
see the scenes I'm looking at over my laptop, but don't think this video is doing it any justice.
Awesome. I'm seeing a reflection of your light. Oh, look at that.
Wow.
Okay, now I've got major FOMO.
Wow.
Quite a backdrop to be having this meeting at. Sipogazi, you got a tough one to beat over there.
Okay, I'll show you mine, but it's a bit messy. But anyways, here you go.
Nice. Awesome.
It's literally a picture of my wig stand and
Awesome.
a painting above me. So nothing fancy really
Awesome.
compared to
So-
Kim and Kyle.
Yeah, definitely. Kyle and Kim are leading this race. So guys, you get that experience. It's random. You're not sure at this point what exactly did Quinn want to see from this. And that's often how we as creatives feel sometimes. The client will come and say, hey, Quinn, shoot something for our business, make it nice. They just want something nice. Quinn wants something nice, want people to be drawn to this video. And not to be redundant or to be a repetitive drum, as what Chris was saying, is to be more specific. So if I'd said to you guys, hey, could I get a wide shot of the desk you're sitting at and maybe a close-up of the laptop that you are currently using to connect to the rest of us, it would have been an easier task for you. But in general, we all showcased different things. And I think as creatives, as a videographer, we all see things differently. And we often, if we're left to our own devices, are going to shoot what we see best. And sometimes, which often leads to clients coming back and saying, like Chris had an example of, but my daughter drew something better. Oh, could you change this, Quinn? Or could you change that? Which is fine, and we live with. But the more specific you are, the more better communication, the better for everyone involved. And so, as I start my let me just share. It sounds like nice music. Is that? Sorry, I'm not sure where the music was coming from.
Yeah, sorry, somebody wasn't muted. I've just muted them. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. It was a nice segue for my presentation. So what is a videographer? I think let's start there. As you can see, we take videos for video production and a small scale video production, things like documentaries. So I've worked on a few sets for Carte Blanche, for example. I do weddings. I was in the Drakensberg this past weekend shooting a beautiful wedding. I've done 1-year-old birthday parties, and then sports events and commercials for corporates, which is something I do on the day-to-day, and training videos. So that's the spectrum of work that videographers tend to work on. And you then think the larger scale, you get cinema photographers you then do your big scale, large scale movies and so forth. So with that little exercise, the biggest thing for me is communication, and simple. Communication is so key in getting the best out of a videographer or any creative. I think as Chris so adequately put it as well, I think there's a lot of similarities in what we're speaking. So to avoid redundancies, I'll try to touch on a few specifics that are more specific to videographers. But in the message, when you are addressing a videographer or calling them up, hey Quinn, let's do a video for our corporate, try have an idea of what's the message of the video. Because the videographer comes, he's probably knows very little about your corporate or your company, and often it's got maybe 1 day to shoot or 2 days to shoot, and the more you can share on your message, the idea of the vision of the video that you're wanting to create, the better it is, and the smoother the whole process goes with that videographer. So communication is everything. And the more detailed the shoot, I'm not expecting you guys to be great producers, like, you know, maybe Quentin Tarantino or anything of that nature, but to have an idea of what you would like the video to have or to showcase. And the next one is look and feel. So a video, for example, for I'm assuming you did say you guys are scientists, for maybe a lab, or maybe you have a report that you want to showcase to the funders. It would be a very different video compared to an educational program that you are trying to run to get more youth involved in science, for example. So know your audience and communicate that again to the videographer, because you don't want to be doing a fundraiser, a funders report kind of video, but the videographer has gone and done some cinematic whooshes and all sorts of creative things over the top, where a more refined PowerPoint, a bit of a PowerPoint and more stills and more interviews kind of shooting was requested or required. And then know the length of the video. I think communicating that is so important in terms of, you also don't want the videographer to be sitting the whole week editing this whole 10-minute long video, and you just wanted it to be an Instagram short reel for 30 seconds. So communicating that is so key. And also knowing your audience. Is it going to be on social media? Is it going to funders? Or is it just going as promotional work? That helps the videographer know how to better edit and target the edits to the required audience. As you might know, anything on social media requires quite a short time frame, as our younger generation kind of has a short attention span, with the reels being 30 seconds or 15 seconds, TikToks, and YouTube, maybe anything over 5 minutes, we start to lose attention. So knowing the different time frames that you want your video to be, and who's going to be viewing it, if it's going to be some funders who want to see details and want to see a more fuller, complete production, then a longer time frame of a video makes sense. And so I don't know if you guys have any questions at this point with these things. Maybe we could do a question before I move to the next slide. We could put our hands up, or you could just unmute yourself and fire away. Going once, going twice, and we're off to the next slide. So, how to avoid conflict? I believe prevention is better than cure, and this is something I try to do with my clients in the beginning, which is to have clear outcomes. So, for example, Nikki maybe might come from Carte Blanche, and she would say, I want to interview this so-and-so, this so-and-so, I want some cutaways, I want this sort of B-roll, and we need it shot in this frame rate, or whatever it is, the technicalities she knows as she's a producer. Or client might come and say, Quinn, we've got a promotional video that we want to do for youth in the Valley of a Thousand Hills. Could you do a video that's going to showcase the science lab, going to have an interview of one of our scientists talking about this specific thing, and then a call to action at the end or something like that. So having clear outcomes with the videographer so that they know, and preferably over email, so we can always refer back to it and say, hey, but Quinn, we did agree upon these outcomes, helps both parties and not, and avoids those awkward situations where it's now your word against my word. But if it's clearly on email format or whatever communication platform, but it's there recorded, we've got our clear outcomes, we know what we want, and we've both agreed on those outcomes, it makes it easier for us to, even when things do go back, we can always go back, go bad, we can always go back to those outcomes and say, hey, but Quinn, you didn't deliver on this, you didn't deliver on this, and you didn't deliver that. Why is that? And deadlines, which is always key as well, in terms of knowing clear deadlines from the beginning. In the beginning, saying, hey, Quinn, by this date, so and so, could we have our videos done? Or if it's a longer period of time, it's a longer, bigger project, we would say, okay, we need the first set of edits to be done by this date, and then the final production to be fully done by this date. And then so we have outcomes tracking throughout the process. And plan for the worst, because not everything works out sometimes. Sometimes memory cards stop working, stop functioning, cameras break, and equipment is broken. Sometimes Premiere Pro, which is the software, crashes and you lose all your edits. So having a plan for the worst in the beginning and having a clear plan of how we will deal with things should things not go as planned is so key, even in terms of delivering work or not delivering work. So if it's withholding payments, things like that, say, hey, Quinn, you never delivered this. What is the reason? If the reason is not sound, Quinn, we can't pay you back, we can't pay you the full amount, or we have to pay us back, remunerate us back. So setting up whatever works with that relationship with the client is key, is important. And I think having this done in the beginning makes it for both parties understand where they stand and how the relationship goes long term, and avoids conflict, I'd like to think. We both understand each step of the process. So any questions there? Going once, going twice. So some tips with videographers. It's always great when you can show a videographer example. This is this is the best thing you can do for a videographer, well, at least for myself, is an example of what you'd like to show. So often, for example, as scientists, you might have seen a science show, or there's a few of them on YouTube. You might be wanting something similar to that style, or you might have seen a documentary that you want your report, video report, to be shot in a similar style. That's great. That's always helpful for a videographer. Then we know exactly, okay, this is what's possible, this is what we can shoot, or this is what we can't shoot. So having an example makes it a lot easier, and makes it yeah, just gives that process and makes it quicker, and it makes it a quicker process and getting things done. And don't be shy to be creative. Share your ideas. Often, I know you do hire us to do the creative work, and 100% that's what we there to do. But often it's also great when clients have their own ideas, and because two minds are better than one. And don't be shy to be creative. The crazier, more expressive, the better, I think, for everyone. And have fun. And simple, I try to have as much fun on shoots, and I believe it just makes working easier. It makes the working relationship easier, and it often produces the best work, because it's just the right energies, the creative juices, having different ideas bouncing off each other often leads to the best work one can do. So that is my simple presentation, short and quick, but communication is always key with videographers. The technical things you can always discuss, but communication of what you want to see, because there's nothing worse than have shot maybe 2 days, edited 2 weeks, come back, and the client is just like, well, that's not what I had envisioned. And so we can dissipate that disappointment by communicating the vision, showing the vision that you have for the video in the beginning. So by the time the final edit comes, everyone is happy, or it's just minor changes to those edits. And don't be afraid to be involved in the shooting. I've worked with some really cool producers who I was actively seeing the certain shots of the video that I'll be taking, and maybe saying, hey, could you maybe use this angle and move the angle? Don't be shy to do that as well. After all, it is your production that you are shooting. You are the director. So don't be shy to be Quentin Tarantino, or I don't know, any other great producer, Christopher Nolan. You can do it. So thank you so much. That's my presentation. If you have any questions, please fire away. I think I've got plenty of time.
Sorry, Kun, I don't think you do have plenty of time. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. No problem.
You would have had plenty of time, but we went over on the talk before. So I'm sorry about that. Any questions, please? Thanks to Kun, we're only running 5 minutes over time now. So thanks very much, Kun. Please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. And then we'll cross over to Carl. Thanks, Kun. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you, Kaniso. Our next presenter will be Kyle. Kyle is a 27-year-old photographer originating from Cape Town. He has worked alongside numerous brands such as Adidas Global, Adidas South Africa, HSB Sport, Uber, Moe, and Verve, and many more. And he has a shop if you'd like to check out his print collection, which is available on the Kyle Kingsley print shop. Over to you, Kyle.
Thanks so much, Sipakazi. First off, it's amazing to have the privilege to present to you all today, wherever you are in the world. I hope you enjoy this and learn something that will assist you in the briefing process down the line. So the style of my presentation is quite resourceful in a sense. I've obviously put together a traditional presentation. I put a lot of the information down so you will be able to refer to that at a later stage. I've also included a Google Drive folder with some resources. These are, there's a briefing template as well as a couple of legal agreements, such as a terms of service agreement for a photographer. I've had a lawyer put this together, as well as a retainer agreement and a general licensing agreement as well. And as I'll mention later on in the presentation, these resources are there to help you gain a deeper inside understanding of the industry standards, what parameters photographers, videographers, this is applicable to videography as well, within which we operate. I think it's important as a client or a producer to understand these parameters, just to avoid conflict and really understand how the whole process works. Obviously, look, not all photographers work with contracts for specific jobs, but it is nice for you guys as the client to maybe present these documents and make use of these templates in order to avoid any misunderstandings down the line. So let me share my presentation. Okay, yeah. As you can see, here's the resource folder in terms of service, brief template, licensing agreement, retainer agreement. I'm not going to run through these. These are for you guys to look through at a later point. I just thought it would add quite a lot of value. So let me go to my presentation view. Alrighty, so photographer briefing. I can skip through this. This poll was presented in the beginning of the presentation just to provide me with a little bit more insight as to what type of photography you are using in your communication. Yeah, it's just more of a point of interest than anything else. So there's another question. This is something that you can ask yourself. Do you struggle to conceptualize the desired outcome? So briefs are obviously designed to achieve a certain outcome. Another question, do you work with photographers who have a background or specialize in medical science on a long-term or regular basis? Or do you use freelancers on a short-term project-to-project basis? Long-term relationships with service providers is obviously key to develop that symbiotic relationship and for them to really understand, you know, specifically with a medical science comms, I think when you have something such as a research process or something that's quite specialized, often the photographer would need to be along for the journey, possibly be a scientist as well, really understand what it is you are trying to communicate. So question number one you need to ask yourself is, what story are we trying to communicate? So I've included a few examples which will refer to the styles of photography, which are used to communicate a specific message, and also the extent to what the brief may be in this process. So obviously you have a micrograph. I've used COVID-19 as the medical science topic for this presentation, seeing as though it is has us by the necks at the moment. So this is an electron microscope image showing the virus that causes COVID-19. Look, like I can't take this photograph, so obviously you need to be working with someone who is specialized at using microscope scanners and really getting a deep insight into the research process. Then you've got portraits of scientists. These are the people behind the research. You're really trying to communicate the human element, shape a picture of, you know, these are real people who are releasing this. So, and these are professional portraits. You could get any old photographer to take photos like these. If they're professional, they will be able to execute that. So next slide, let's see if I've missed one here. Sorry. Let me go back. So Chris had an example of this series as well. I'm not sure if it's the same series, but exhaustion and emptiness, faces of those in the front line. Here you're really communicating the human element, showing the seriousness of the pandemic and putting faces to the people who are attempting to save lives. This brief, I mean, it's documentary photography. Someone goes into a hospital and they take photos of the faces of the medical professionals. It's pretty straightforward. There's obviously pretty complicated protocol around operating in a hospital during a pandemic. So, and then this would be used for something like PR, news usage. It wouldn't be something that's commercial. It's more of a expose. Could do a solo gallery exhibition of it, but yeah. So then you've got something like a stock photograph, which here you're trying to portray the spread of the virus from an individual. So a photographer could be briefed by, so stock photos generally are created to be used by many people across different uses. Again, it would likely be news, PR avenue, but yeah, this brief is obviously more precise. There's a little bit of lighting, there's probably a studio, there's a subject, so then you would have model release agreements. So yeah, there's a little bit more at play there than just documentary. And then photojournalism, this is obviously showing the seriousness of the spread of the virus and how people are addressing it. But again, photojournalists know the core of the story and they'll document it as best possible. Then you've got another stock photo, likely not really a stock photo, it's someone likely in the research process with the vaccine. Again, very varied use. It could be used in an academic journal to show the research process. It could be to funders, it could be to the general public, PR, whatever. And then here, this kind of brief would be probably a little bit more complicated. You would need a producer to create this location. You've got a cast that spreads across various ages, races, and genders. And obviously this is to appeal to a broader target market, also varied use, and there would be licensing involved with this, a little bit complicated, many people at play. So in order to achieve the dream brief, you need to have the dream client and they really understand what the concept is, the role of the photographer, what the budget is, for the photographic creative process, which I'm going to get into, and then the industry standards, which you can also gain a little bit of insight into through the resources that I've provided. Then another brainstorming tool. I think these are questions that you should be asking yourself before you deliver a brief. Who is the message, the story, the concept, or what is that message? Who is the target market? How does the concept fit into our marketing communication strategy? Will these photos resonate emotively with our target audience? What are our brand guidelines? Do I have any examples of photographs? This is really important. Things such as the orientation, the lighting, the subjects, the color, the environment. So when you're trying to create the stock photograph, like that previous example in the lab, all of these things have been specified and would be included in a shot list. There would be a mood board created around that. I will get into that. And then importantly, what is the timeline from briefing to final edit delivery? And then what are the usage parameters? This is also really important with professional photographers. We like to know exactly what it's going to be used for, what that time duration is. Generally the topic of disagreements when photographs are used without consent. Then the role of the photographer. So this is also really important. A photographer is not necessarily a producer. Your role is to help develop the mood board alongside the client or the producer, and then develop the shot list, again, with the relevant stakeholders. Then to execute the photography, edit the raw files, and deliver a final product in a specified format. That's also really important. Then this is the role of the producer. So it's good to be able to separate them somewhat. A photographer can obviously fulfill these roles, so that needs to be included in the brief. So it's more just a scope thing, and that's where the communication comes in to play. Securing talent, scouting and acquiring a studio or the location permits you're going to need. Securing additional scientific or lighting equipment. Organizing additional cast and crew. The call sheet, how is the shoot going to play out? You know, all the different elements at play. When are we executing what shot? These are all things that really need to be planned out, or at least communicated, so that everyone is on the same page. And then the production management. Photographers generally are quite focused on what they're shooting, and if there's a makeup artist, the stylist, you know, managing the cast, there's definitely an additional hand that needs to be played there. Then the budget, very important. Freelance creatives work according to hourly, half day, full day, and project rates. Consult with a photographer to determine the timeline you may need to achieve the desired outcome, and then prepare your marketing budget according to industry standards. So there's obviously a little bit of a consultation process. The photographer doesn't necessarily need to know the entire budget, but there are elements at play in the planning process and in the build up towards when the shoot is executed. So you really need to know or understand what it is you're involved in and what our market budget needs to be prior to commissioning a photographer. Then the photographic creative process. So a brief would generally outline and include some of the following, sometimes all, sometimes none. It really depends just on how comprehensive and what the style and message you're trying to communicate. So the creative direction, I like this concept. Instead of storytelling, call it science telling. Again, the concept message, very important. You can tell a few stories in a shoot, but an image generally tells one story or a variant of one story. So as Chris mentioned, have that one idea for one shot if you want to be really precise. Otherwise, there's a general feel for the shoot. And obviously your timeline, your references and mood board. So first things first, like as a client, providing references always helps a huge amount. Then the photographer and the client can come together and share color palettes, different styles of shots, different locations, and then you can brainstorm a little bit and then really refine the look and feel of what you want. And then call sheets, again, the producer's job. I think I've gone past, yeah. So production, styling, props, makeup, casting, locations, equipment. These are things that need to be outlined. Who is taking control of these things? I've had instances where you left in the dark with certain service providers with the clients, and yeah, that tends to lead to a little bit of confusion down the line. In your call sheet, this is something that the producer would take care of as well, unless you are the producer. Shot list, processing and editing. So this would refer back to your mood board, exactly what is the look and feel of the process or the editing process. And then the deliverables, so what formats are they delivering, the dimensions and resolution. And that really ties into the usage. If you're doing a shoot for specifically social media, or if it's out of home, billboard, point of sale, what are the considerations that need to be taken into before delivering the final product? And I've gone into this, specified or unspecified quantity of images, referring to the shot list. So the planning process will really determine the quantity. Is there a minimum, or is there a maximum, or is it somewhere in between? Generally, it's somewhere in between, quality over quantity. So specified format and resolution requirements, shooting both portrait and landscape orientation to avoid unnecessary cropping. Yeah, if you're gonna use photographs, use them how they're intended. Let's try not destroy the artist's work by getting weird with cropping really small into an image. And then the design considerations. This is really important to be communicated, any pre-planned designs for specific usage. Then the usage, touched on a couple of things here. This usage calculator is really helpful that you can tick a time duration, a base usage rate, a location, like a market where you're going to be advertising. And then it spits out a number. It's a good starting point. It is quite high. It's an international standard. So South African industry is quite a bit lower, but if you use it properly, it is a good way to get to know the extent of the usage. And then I've included a usage license agreement. So this is just so that the photographer and the client both agree, okay, the images are going to be used for this purpose for this long. It can be a blanket usage agreement where you say we commission these photographs to use them however we want for however long we want, but not everyone works according to that. So it's good to keep that in mind. Model release, also very important. All the subjects, if so news photojournalism, you don't need press releases, model releases, because it's in public interest, but anything for commercial and advertising purposes, you need express consent from the people who are starring in the photographs. Education, this refers back to the poll in the beginning. I've worked with a couple of brands over a long period of time, and you really get to know the people, the message they're trying to portray, their processes. It makes the whole process a lot easier if you're working with someone time and time again. And you will likely get it for a cheaper rate. So educate and provide appropriate training to photographers if they're not familiar with the subject or story you're attempting to communicate. I think this is pretty relevant in the medical science communication field. Process is everything, so the better the understanding, the better. Then avoiding conflict. I haven't included a model release agreement, but you could adopt the usage agreement for that, because you would need to agree with the subjects on the exact usage. I've had instances where models have rocked up to a pretty big commercial shoot and they don't understand or know what the photos are going to be used for, and that's a fault on the client's end. I didn't have a role to play in the consultation of the subject. Okay, next. Brief prior to finalizing the budget. Do not change the brief or project timeline without consulting the photographer. Collaborate and communicate to achieve the best outcome, and ensure parties have agreed to the terms and conditions. This is super important. If it's down in writing and there's express consent agreement, you know, there's very little that can go wrong. And if something does go wrong, you know that you have recourse. And that's the end. So I'm conscious of time. I think there's 5 minutes, but happy to hand over to the next speaker. Thanks all for your time.
Thank you, Kyle, and thank you for your great presentation. Because you finished 5 minutes earlier, I think we can take questions.
Cool, let's do it.
Does
If
everyone
anyone has any questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat if you are going to keep your mic off. I'm also happy to take questions. If you have any questions at a later stage, you can email me. My email is kyle@kylekinsey.com.
I just wanted to find out from everyone, has everyone taken the poll? I know Kim was running it during your presentation. Could you please make sure that you've taken the poll? I'm going to give everyone about 2 minutes, and then after that, Kyle, maybe you can go through your poll results with us.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a question that has come through from Santosh Bastia. Sometimes the client is not so cooperative. How do you manage that? So at the end of the day, it's the client's prerogative if they're not going to be cooperative. It really depends on the brief and the style of photography. I'd be very happy to receive a brief where someone says, we need to portray their motive and human side, or the reality and intensity of COVID, for example. And then I would use my initiative and just go into a hospital or healthcare facilities or a morgue or and just shoot how I think would be the best way to tell that story, because I think medical science is quite the interpretation of it is quite subjective, but there's many ways to tell a story. It's not too complex of a message to portray. But then if they would want to execute a stock photography shoot and they have specifics, look, then there's an agreement that if it doesn't go according to what you want, if you change your mind down the line, then it's not really my problem because you haven't assisted in that process. So I think I try to deal with people, and the work that I do generally involves a communication process where we work. Again, photographers do. If you just tell me the message and you give me the budget, I'll make it happen. So yeah, I think photographers are quite good at doing things on the fly. Okay, so here are the poll results. Portrait photography of scientists seems to be the #1 field of photography. Interesting. And then documentary photography, event photography, stock photography. Yeah, so event photography, I've done quite a lot of, it's quite obvious to a photographer what the key elements are to document. Yeah, it's not a complex brief. Obviously, if there are specifics such as keynote speakers, service providers that you need branding that you need to document, then that can be specified. Do you struggle to conceptualize the desired outcome? Yes, I think most people, if I want to shoot something creative on my own accord, it's pretty hard process, but I hope that these resources will help you a little bit. Like I said, find references. There's so much good work out there, and use it as inspiration. I think medical science is a great field to be in communications. And do you work with photographers who have a background specialized in medical science on a long-term basis? Short term. Okay, so short term's the outcome of that. I think retainers, if you can get a photographer on a retainer, where you say to them, look, over the course of a year, I will give you a job every month or a job every 2 months, and can I have a preferential rate? You don't have to be paid all at once. It can be on a monthly basis. That's definitely the best way to get better rates, and then obviously develop that relationship. Short term, people can be quite aloof and just kind of do a half job. And then, did you find this presentation valuable? Yes. Thanks, guys. So I think that's all from me, just in time for the next talker, presenter.
Thank you so much, Kyle. As mentioned in your presentation, we will send everyone the templates that Kyle provided via email. We're having a bit of a technical error uploading them on the chat box. So
no worries.
Yeah, so we'll send them to everyone via email after this workshop. All right, and our last speaker for the day will be Kim. Kim is from Hello Square and is a digital project manager and has about 10 years experience in the industry. He has completed a large scale of web app projects for clients such as Defy, Tiger Brands, and the Africa Health Research Institute, and many others. Thank you so much, and over to you, Kim.
Hi everyone, everyone's doing well. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the best process to go through to effectively brief website developers. This can be quite a challenge because you're obviously trying to achieve something that's a mix of achieving sort of creative and communication objectives while still making sure that you tick all the right boxes in terms of the technical side of things. And I think a lot of people find this process a little bit intimidating because there's a lot of different aspects that need to be considered, and you might not be aware of what all of those are, and some of them might be a little bit outside of your general area of expertise. So the approach that we like to take with clients is to run them through a series of questions. This is not essentially the brief template. This would be something you do as a lead up to developing your brief. What it does is it makes sure that you have all the correct answers, that you really define the outcomes for this project effectively. And it also makes sure that we cross off some of the most important managerial, project management, and technical questions up front, because those are all very critical for a project management perspective and from the perspective of how the web development team should come back to you in terms of how they envision this solution. The other part of this document is that it needs to chop and change over time, and it won't be applicable to every single project. There are parts of it that are really relevant to some projects and less relevant to others, and that's okay. It's meant to be a starting point that gets you kind of with all the baseline. So if the answers to some of these questions that it's not applicable, that's fine. It's a reasonable answer. Some of them you will find will actually stump you, and you have to be in a position where you have to go back and do some research and talk to some other members of your team to get your answers, which is a good thing because it means that you've seen that issue up front and dealt with it up front rather than trying to deal with it at the wrong stage of development. The one critical thing that we try to avoid by going through this document is that when you're working through a website development project or any sort of project that involves coding or development, that as you get further along the project, changes or omissions to the scope or additions to the scope can throw your timelines and possibly your costs way off. Whereas sometimes if those changes were identified as being required early in the process, it can be a complete non-issue and sometimes not even affect the scope or cost at all to include them early on. So it's really important that you make sure that you have a very clear vision of what you're looking for, and these questions will hopefully get you there. Now, we've chopped and changed these quite a lot over the years. As I said, they do change quite a lot. And I'll try to refer back to some website projects so that they make a bit more sense. Okay, so this is the crux. And you might have a very strong answer to this right off the get-go, or it might be one of the more challenging questions. But in one or two sentences, you need to define the problem that this website is solving. So websites can come in a lot of different formats. Sometimes they're just there to communicate critical things about your organization, but the wrong approach, what a lot of people tend to think, is that it's sort of a box-checking exercise. We have to have a website, so let's make one. That's not a great approach because you're not going to get a lot of value out of that project, and you're going to sort of incur budgetary spend, and you're going to end up changing it in 3 or 4 years when you realize that it's not doing the job that it needs to do. So it could be as simple as it would need to communicate the following 3 things about our organization, and that's perfectly fine. Maybe it needs to do a bigger job, but defining that upfront is really important. What could it be doing in this context? What should it be doing? How far do you want to take this journey? How far does it need to intervene with your key stakeholders? So defining that, and again, defining that in 2 sentences is very important because we need to cut it down to the most important aspects of the project. The other critical thing about this is that we are defining the problem, not the solution. When people embark on these projects, one of the worst practices that you can go about is this sort of reverse engineering, where you have a solution in mind or a particular piece of technology in mind, and you're very hyper-focused on addressing that particular piece of tech or addressing that particular solution. A strong website team should be able to work with you from the problem to define the solution, whereas a sort of very hyper-focused solution-oriented project can sometimes go over budget and do things that are not actually necessary. So keeping it focused is very critical. This is now moving into the second major problem that you have when you're working with an external website development team. So a website team will probably involve some designers, developers, copywriters, possibly outsourced photographers, videographers, and all kinds of other team members, depending on what the project is sort of actively working in. So all of these people need to understand your organization. They need to get a very rapid onboarding to make sure that each part of the project reflects you correctly and reflects your organization correctly. there's always going to be a period of sort of back and forth revision feedback to make sure that that messaging and that sort of comes across correctly. But the closer you can get on the first version, the faster you can get to the end version. So the elevator pitch is just a term that we've used for this very short overview of the company. We force people in this situation to try and keep it short, because over-explaining doesn't actually teach us anything. And remember, we have to onboard on our side our creatives very quickly. They need to get 10 years worth of information that might be sitting on your team into their heads and into their work within, you know, a couple of weeks. So being able to be concise allows us to figure out what parts of that communication, or what parts of your organization are most important in terms of how we represent that in our work. And that can come out in a lot of different areas. It doesn't just have to be visual. It could be in copy, it could be in how the site is structured, it could be in the order of the content as it's broken down on the site. If you've recently gone through a branding process, if you've recently gone through a sort of self-reflective process as an organization, you may have these answers offhand. They might be part of an existing document. They may exist in some other format, but achieving the same end goal. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't have to be this particular answer, but if you can understand the essence of what we're getting to and what we need to then pass through to the team, that's fine, as long as you have it documented somewhere in a way that can be shared. Following on that point, if you haven't gone through this process recently, if you are completely blank, if you know you have gone through a long time since you've rebranded, a long time since you've really questioned them, the next two questions can be really, really helpful, because they can help you examine that quickly without having to pause, hit pause on the website project for 6 months to really do a self-examination in that space. But describing your company in 3 objectives is a quick shortcut to getting that through to the team. Again, if you have branding documents, if you have a style guide, if you have communication guides, these are better ways to answer these questions, but don't hit pause for 6 months to go and do that process just to the website. If you can go through these questions and answers, it can help you get there. So the 3 objectives, and obviously this can spark a lot of debate internally, which again is a good thing. Debate these internally, to have disagreements about them, because it's much easier to change one of these 3 objectives many, many times and to revise and have meetings about it than it is to change a website design that is fundamentally hitting the right tone, the wrong tone, that is communicating things in the wrong way, that comes off maybe too professional or unapproachable or too approachable. These are very specific marks that you want these designs to hit, and having these things correct helps you get there. Again, building on that, explaining the value proposition of your organization beyond your end deliverables. So you can probably describe your organization's outputs, whether that's research or communication functions, a newsletter. So what goes beyond that? How can you describe it in a way that goes beyond the physical end deliverables that you hand over every week or every month or every quarter? Let us communicate the intangibles that make a difference, that make it a unique story. In your industry, you don't really work with competitors. It's not a story about competition, but the personality and the essence of, that's probably not the best word, but essentially that the essence of your organization that you would really like to come through in that communication needs to be stated, because you guys will know it sort of almost instinctually from being involved in your organizations for longer periods of time and from working them day to day. But getting that through to a team is a lot harder. So again, this is a little shortcut to get you there. Again, another useful question to get that brand sort of conveyance across when you don't have stronger documents to help you do it. But what brand does your company aspire to be more like? So what we're looking for when we ask this question is not for a competitor. It's not for someone else in your industry that you want to be held up against. It's not for your parent company or anything along those lines, or similar organizations overseas. It's from a brand feel perspective. So if you've worked primarily in print, in other creative elements that don't really talk to how you would like to be seen online, this can be a really great way for you to get to that point, to kind of identify that feeling that you want people to get when they get you. So we're not talking about content, we're not talking about functionality, we're talking purely about feel. So as an example, we chatted to a insurance agency a couple of days ago, and their answer to this question was Patagonia, which is a clothing and goods company that has a very specific brand feel to it. And it allows us to understand that just by this one answer, it gave us a lot of insight into how these people want to be perceived and where they see themselves in position in terms of not only their potential customers, but their suppliers, other people in their industry, their partners, and even their own employees. This is how they want to be seen. So even though these two industries have absolutely nothing to do with one another, that brand comparison gives us a lot of insights into what kind of approach we should take in terms of how we should treat the photography that's handed over to us, how we should treat the brand assets that are handed over to us. And even though these things already exist, how we handle them online speaks volumes about the organization in ways that go beyond just what's written down, just the content that's on the page. So having this comparison really helps us to make sure that we hit the mark on that point right off the bat. And it can get us closer to something that you can't usually get to just with feedback alone. Just sort of explaining what you want rather than being able to say, well, this brand, and you sort of show it to them. So it's, again, a useful little trick to get to that point. Okay, so if we manage to get through these questions, then we have some idea of like what direction we're going in. And we have some idea of how we want to get there, particularly in terms of how we want a user on your site to contextualize the experience and what we want them to come away with, and just in terms of a gut feeling, which is great. So that really helps our creatives understand some of the outcomes that we're looking for. Now we're going to start to drill into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty. So is there a story that is unique to your company or your organization? So again, when we're bringing our guys on board, our creatives or outsourced creatives or other teams that we're working with, the onboarding has to be rapid. We have to really get them understanding the intangibles, the hard to communicate really quickly. And one of the critical parts of that is the unique story. Is there something about your organization that really kind of goes beyond what can be communicated quickly or easily? Because there might be ways to communicate that visually through technology, through how the functionality of your site behaves, and baking it in on a fundamental level like that can make that story a core part of the user experience, which is obviously a really great outcome, something that we really want to shoot for. So getting that story written down, and this doesn't have to be short, you can really write essays about this, but you want it to be sort of in a format that, again, we can share back with the team, they can really digest, and then they can come back with solutions that integrate that story into the user, into that overall user journey. But again, we are not going into solutions mode at all at this point. We're not talking about potential solutions. We're not talking about potential technologies. We're talking about very, very top level outcomes. Right. So then now we go a little bit further into the nitty-gritty. So understanding how to communicate your target audience to your website developer is quite critical. A lot of people give sort of job titles to us when we're looking for who this target audience is. But what different people with different job titles might be looking for from your website might be very different. So for example, a journalist that's looking for information to cite in an article that they're writing is a very particular person versus someone that is looking for background information on what services you actually offer or where you operate. These are maybe the same job title, but with completely different outcomes. So it's really important that you summarize who they are, what they're actually looking to get out of this, and also what their approach to the site might be. Could you imagine them quickly pulling this up on their cell phone to check something quickly before they go into a meeting? Or to open up your newsletter, or to try to find a newsletter from 2 months ago so that they can reference a particular part of it? Or is it more likely that they're going to be opening up on a work desktop and going through it really exhaustively, trying to check every fact and tick every box, make sure that they have a really comprehensive understanding of what they're looking at? And sometimes it might be both, just for different people. So really try to go into some detail where you can. I know that particularly within science communication, you guys are going to be dealing with a very broad audience in terms of potential audiences or potential stakeholders that will engage with you. But defining the most important ones will help us shape how the user journey and content and functionality should be tailored to meet those different people. And it can also, very importantly, understand how much weighting you should give to desktop versus mobile for different areas of the site, whether it should be optimized more for desktop or optimized more for mobile. Okay, so just going into further detail on that, once you have your target audiences, it's really important that you break them out in terms of their role and probable goals. So we will look at what that would mean in terms of an actual application. We can have a look at the Durban ICC here. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but when we went through this process with the Durban ICC, and they're actually currently rebuilding their website. So we went through this with them quite recently. They have two very, very different types of audience members here. They have people that are looking for information about the ICC itself because they are interested in hosting something there, versus people that are actually visiting the center. And the people visiting the center essentially want to have the best experience that they can on the day, or for an extended stay to deal with a long-term conference. And they might want to know where accommodation is, or they might want to know how to get to the ICC quickly from different areas of the city. This is a completely different set of goals and something that's much more likely to occur on, say, mobile than when we compare it to an event organizer that's looking for very exhaustive information about how many plug points there are on floor 2 at level 5 and how many will be available. It's to make sure that they can cover all their bases for an event that they might be planning. So we have essentially completely divergent goals. So if we just known it was event planners and people attending an event, we might have seen them as similar. They just want like a quick dip into this information and to carry on. But in reality, when we talk about what they each were trying to get out of this and how different those things are, realize that we actually need to treat the user experience within those spaces very differently and make sure they cater for the outcomes for each group. Okay, again, one of the tough ones. What do you want people to take away after interacting with the website? So this covers a bunch of intangible sort of feelings, as well as concrete outcomes, such as learning about a particular thing, maybe subscribing. You basically are starting to build your end KPIs, your end goals for the website here. So this might be a long list, and it might be different based on these different stakeholders that you've identified earlier, which is fine. It can be narrowed down over time, and it can be prioritized over time. But it's important that we start talking about this in terms of now, particular piece of maybe information you want to convey, particular actions that you want them to take, and start really pinning those down. Putting these all out and then prioritizing them, again, will influence how the user journey should be shaped. KPIs. What are the goals? Once the site is launched, where do you want to be in 1 month? This is very difficult to answer, particularly when you don't have an established web presence that you feel works strongly and you're building on something that's already there to contextualize where you'd like to go. So what often ends up happening is that no goals are set, and then there's no real reflection post-launch to say whether they achieve them or not, whether new works has to be done or whether things need to be changed, etc., etc. If you can't answer these, don't leave them blank. Don't sort of abandon that goal and just say, well, launch and see what happens. And if it's received well internally, then we can say job well done. Work with your web development team to try to set benchmarks for yourself. And if they're wrong, that's fine, because you've started that process and you can refine it over time. It's just important that you set something so that you can try to establish post-launch where you need to be and how you need to change. It doesn't mean that you have to constantly evolve the website. You need to obviously be conscious of your return for each additional update that you make or changes that you make over time. But you are not working from an informed position if you don't set these goals up front. And trying to set them retroactively never really works out as well as knowing where you're shooting for from the beginning. A good team will also be able to help you benchmark against other organizations if you don't have any data yourself. Okay. So moving on, another one of the sort of bigger questions is the primary content areas. So one of the very common things that we see in briefs is that the client breaks out essentially what they're thinking of in terms of the pages for their websites, and it tends to be fairly straight structured. You know, we have home and services, maybe products if you offer products, something about yourself, your history, and then a way of contacting you. That's a very sort of static breakdown. And anything that falls outside of that, it gets broken down to say extra pages or sub pages of those top level items. There's no reason things need to be structured like that. And why we often end up in that situation is because of solutions oriented thinking at the beginning. So we start defining the pages that we're looking for immediately as part of the brief or the costing exercise, and then everyone retrofits information or content to go into those spaces. That's not what we should be doing. Don't worry about what the pages should be. Don't think about the end outcome of the website. What are the content areas? What groupings of content are there? They can be loosely defined, and they can be defined by their outcome or their target audience or any other group that makes sense to you. But think about, if you were a user, what information would you want to read if you're interested in a particular thing, and where would you want to go next from there, and break them up that way. You're thinking about the outcomes in terms of the takeaways from reading this information, not necessarily how it needs to be structured. Having this as an overview puts you in a really strong position to work with your web team to actually see how this can be broken up in a way that's more digestible to users. Because one of the biggest challenges that you will struggle with working with content for your website, briefing the content and working with the team with content, is length. Most people overestimate how much time users will dedicate to reading the information that you put on the page before you've offered them a compelling reason to continue, which means that they take the easy path out of putting more content on the page to try to cover all their communication objectives. The difficult job that you need to work through with your team and is cutting it down to the bare bones, things that people will actually read, and then bringing the additional information out further down the user journey once you've given them a compelling reason to read, and also making sure that even if they just read that first part, the first breakpoint, that you've already achieved some of your communication objectives before they leave. This, when you're already thinking in terms of established pages rather than content, is much more challenging. So break it out, make it very loose, it's absolutely fine, and then work with the teams to see how it should actually be structured. It also gives you, puts you in a strong position to work with designers visually to see how things should be broken down, because you haven't gone too far down that journey. So when you actually visualize this in an early step on the design phase, you're still in a position to break things up further, which is a good position to be in. It gives you more flexibility. Okay. This next question just deals with the secondary content areas. So when you break all this information out, prioritize it. And it doesn't just have to be primary and secondary. It can be as many levels as you want, or levels of importance, however you want to break it out. But because of the fact that people tend to skim and not read, you have to make sure that things are structured in a way that the most important stuff is read and as short as possible before leading people into the sort of more meaty content. The structure of this is also really important. And I'm going to give you an example that's outside of your industry, but will maybe illustrate what I mean by the structure of content. So we have the Jungle Oats website here. And there's obviously a huge amount of stuff going on the site, lots of information, but we're just going to focus on the products. Now, if we're thinking about how products should be broken up, they're essentially collections of content. It's talking about a particular product. There's some images, there's some supporting information. But we need to understand how should they be broken up in the context of each other and the site itself. So, for example, we could simply have all the products on a top level belong directly to products as a menu item, each referencing it, so allowing you to move through it. Or we can break it into these subsections, which you can see: oats, instant muesli, porridge, kids, and snacks. Or we could break it into the relevance for different consumers. So maybe on the go versus at home versus breakfast, etc. And these are all valid ways of doing it. But each one has different impacts on how consumers will perceive and deal with this content. This doesn't follow directly the way that the brand actually categorizes it from a manufacturing perspective. So we broke that rule working with them because we felt that this would offer people a better outcome moving through the site. So that we moved away from what would have essentially been the default in terms of how these things are structured to create a better outcome for how people would interact with the site. And that's exactly what you should be doing with your web development teams, is not just taking information as it's conveyed, but working with them to structure it in a way that is actually going to work to achieve your end goals. So move away from the page-oriented thinking at the beginning, think about outcomes and think about content, and then work with your team to define that. Okay, a good question to ask upfront. Rich media. How important is this in terms of your communication? Video, animations, getting the production rolling on this. This can really be something that if it's handled badly, can derail a process, because the production of the rich media materials doesn't tie up with the overall project plan for the website. And when they're produced, they don't fit into the design thinking ethos or structure or template of the site, which means that you then have to go and re-engineer things to work around the content. Whereas if you understand what you're looking for at the beginning and you work with the third parties that are producing that content right from the get-go and get the creatives talking to each other early, everyone is going to be going in the same direction. It can also help you look at areas where you can repurpose things that you already have and use them elsewhere on the site. So if we have a look at this video that's currently looping on the Durban ICC site, they didn't have to shoot this. It was part of a conference video that they already had. It's quite old now, but we'll do a new one for their new site. So by taking this, it's obviously not conveying anything specific. It's just there for flavor. It's just there for background information. But it does a lot more work than a single static image of the exterior of the building would do. Because was because we asked this question early on, be able to find it, cut it, and then use it in the space. I didn't really say where they again we cut it. You would follow the same process. Identify it early, figure out what you want to do with it, and make sure that ties in with your overall project plan. Okay. So as you can see, we're kind of moving further and further into the detail from the big picture down as we go through this document, but we're never really getting into the complete sort of brief or scope just yet. We're still trying to focus on the deliverables, focus on the problems, that sort of thing. So the key stakeholders and client team members. The reason why we'd asked this so early in the process, when it seems like such a perfunctory part of a project management process, is because when you're working through a website, as I've mentioned, the further down the process you go, the more time consuming and expensive it is to make changes. So where you can hit a really difficult project management problem is when you have a multi-structured management team who have different levels that need to give approval at different stages of the process. If that is the case, the thing you do not want to have is to go to a fairly advanced stage of the website process, wanting to build up enough collateral, wanting to build enough things for your presentation to really impress your sort of executive teams or your board or whoever else is sort of has the final say. And you get to that advanced stage of the process and then display to them. And then they have feedback that is relatively fundamental, sort of not really, polish here, tweak this, tweak that, but fundamentally changes how you want to engage with your users or impacts the user journey, or even worse, something to do with functionality that's been quite difficult to build. This can completely derail your project, and it can bring on a lot of additional costs and or a really sort of disjointed project process, because now you have to go back to phase one, et cetera, et cetera. So establish who those people are up front. Establish what kind of impact they want to have. How much of this do they want to see when you go from phase to phase to phase to phase. And the web development team that you're working with will define with you as part of their scope of work that they'll present to you in terms of how they want to go about the project. They'll break up phases and when you need to approve each phase in the overall process. So you need to make sure that you tie that up with your key stakeholders and make sure that they come in at the right time. And that most importantly, they understand what feedback you're looking from them at this stage. It is perfectly acceptable to bring them on early with rougher work, rougher edges, and push them for feedback about the more of the intangible stuff, about the overall project direction, visual direction, creative direction, et cetera, and get on the right journey. And then for them to essentially, once they're happy with that, delegate responsibility for the detail to people further down the chain. If you can all agree on that up front and you can get that delegation and trust between levels of management, it means the project can run a lot more smoothly, because you don't have the possibility of someone coming in 3/4 of the way through and pulling the rug up from under anyone. If that's not possible, that's also fine, but you have to plan for it, because otherwise you will go through this process and something will get changed and your timeframes will go out. So figure it out up front and plan for it. Yeah, I think a couple of the other guys mentioned this as well. The do not exceed budget, or getting the budget up front. And I know that this is a tricky one, because how much is this really worth to you as an organization, or what is an appropriate amount to spend on this project? Is this provider middle of the range in terms of their costing, or are they quite expensive? And it's difficult to tell. So particularly when you have multiple providers that are asking you what your budget is and you're not really sure what you need to be spending. I think that with this, I would recommend finding someone that you can trust and have as a supplier, and having an open conversation with them about what you can walk away with, or what projects should be priced at, and working with some example scopes that you can put together and getting some kind of context. I know that you do need to have someone that you can sort of work with and have an open, candid conversation with to get there. But the important part is post that point, if you then use that as a baseline to go and request additional quotes, and you will sort of be in a much stronger position to understand when someone is underquoting you or overquoting you. And it can also help you figure out if maybe your scope that you have in mind, the scale of what you're looking to do, is possibly just not a good idea in terms of what it's actually going to cost and what you're going to get out of it. This, yeah, it is quite a tough one, but having an open conversation is really important.
Hi, Kim. Sorry to
Hi.
interrupt you. You have about 1 minute. Could you please start wrapping up?
Yeah, let me see how far I've got. Okay, I'm going to do the last ones really quickly. System mandatories. So now we're getting to a bit of a technical thing, but basically go through, figure out what the mandatory, chat your IT team, find out what the mandatory must-haves in terms of tech, get them upfront. This is a huge derailer for projects. Speak to everyone you can about what is required. Anyone technical in your organization that manages everything that is sort of that could have a must-have say as part of this process, and make sure it's all stated up front, because otherwise your costings aren't going to be accurate. Figure out what parts of the website you're going to need to update, what you want third parties to update, and what can stay static for maybe a year or 2 years until you get a developer involved again. Outline those. Does your newsletter need to be editable? Do you need to be uploaded? Do you need to change your blog? Do you need to change sections on the most important information that you present? Understand that upfront so that doesn't come in at the end of the project. Figure out your SEO goals upfront, and a perfectly responsible answer to that is I don't know, or it's not as relevant to my organization. SEO is often a tick box that's added to briefs that just sticks around, and it doesn't really add anything to the project. Google things, ask people that have found your organization what they've Googled to find you, and how Google itself has a lot of great tools to let you figure this out, and figure out what's actually relevant to you, because this is a road that you can go down, spend a bunch of budget on it, and even if you achieve your goal, you still don't really get that much out of it. So yeah, get a feeling for what you actually need out of that space, but don't go down that road if you don't have to. Cool. All right. Not sure how much time I have left. I may have waffled on a little bit too long there. I'm not sure if we have any time for questions.
I've got one question that I would like to ask.
Sure.
What advice would you give a client who would like to play videos through their website? Like, would you suggest that they use YouTube or Vimeo? Like, I would like to know that real quick.
Sure. So what I would say is, first thing, what are they trying to do with these videos? Okay, so don't focus on a particular tech solution first. What are they trying to achieve? I'm trying to communicate something. Are you trying to have people sit down and for like 40 minutes and really get engaged and go through something? Are they going to be watching it on their phones, on on public transport. These are things that you need to establish because it'll help you guide that. With that being said, Vimeo and YouTube offer really, really fast streaming rates. So, and you'll get that within South Africa. There's got a lot of different buffering options, etc., etc. So there's no reason not to leverage that, unless what you're looking for is something that you don't want displayed. You don't want it moving into third parties who want to really, really control how people engage with this video, where they do it, the context they do it, which is acceptable. But you're then moving into a space where you have to re-engineer a lot of what Google and Vimeo are essentially offering you. The comparison between the two, Vimeo and YouTube, Google has more servers in South Africa, so your latency is generally better. Vimeo, in terms of how actual like a brand feels a little bit more premium. So if you are wanting to kind of have a little bit of that more of intangible premium feel to the video, you can look at Vimeo and see what kind of speed you get. If you're looking more premium, people generally have better internet connections anyway, so the difference in the latency probably matters less. For really short videos that are just there, as I said, give the example of ICC, they're just there for flavor, they're just there to give you an impression. Post that locally, because then you can have it display the way you want it to and have it big and the good quality while still being quick to load. That kind of really sort of intense tailoring can only happen when you control it entirely. But because it's such a short video, you don't have to worry about that as much.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have one question from the chat box from Emmanuel. He's asking, is it possible to have a template of or a brief on how to also a criteria of evaluation criteria for web developers?
I don't have anything on hand.
Okay.
I would look at their previous projects. So this is what I would do. Okay, I would look at their previous projects and I would ask them if they could share the brief that led to that project. If they don't have that, if they've worked with Author Brief, if they've just taken phone calls and emails and they've produced something, I would generally steer. Well, I'd be more cautious. I wouldn't say steer away. Some people, have different ways of working. But have a look at the brief and see what the outcome was and ask them about what was the thinking about why this was the solution in relation to that brief and see what they come back. In terms of, the technical capacities or capabilities of developers, that is harder to assess. It can be a bit more difficult, but have a look at the other sites they put together, see how quickly they load, or even ask if you can chat to some of their clients. This thing with web development teams is this is a service industry, right? So you will likely get a good product out of someone that offers you a good service from the beginning, someone that answers emails, answers phone calls, is professional, works with you through a fairly structured process. That level of service needs to be there. If it's not there, you're probably going to get a bad service.
All right, we have now, thank you so much, Kim. We have now come to the end of our workshop. I'm going to ask everyone to please take about 2 minutes of your time to fill out the evaluation form. You can find the link in the chat box. And once you're done with the evaluation form, you can leave the meeting. Thank you so much, everyone.